Hello there, and a warm welcome to this edition of the Citizens Chat Show on Civic Space TV, streaming on YouTube. My name is Judith Atim, and it's a pleasure to have you. Today we are talking about the future of the East African community, given the turbulence regarding free movement of goods and services in the region. We're focusing also a little more on the case of Martha Karua's temporary license to represent politician Dr. Kizza Besigye and his colleague Haj Obeid Lutale. And joining me to share their insights and be a part of this conversation are these four guests that I'm having. Right from my immediate left is Dr. Robert Ojambo, who is the head of the History Department at Chambogo University. Dr. Ojambo, a warm welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Next to Robert is Honorable Miriam Matembe, lawyer, former Minister for Ethics and Integrity, retired and seasoned politician. Honorable Matembe, good afternoon and welcome to the show.
Also doctor, by the way.
Doctor.
Yes.
Pardon me for that mistake. Honorable Dr. Miriam Matembe, you're most welcome to the show.
Thank you, just to make fun.
No, but I mean, I have to address you by your title, your phone, Joseph. Next to Honorable Dr. Miriam Matembe is my good friend, Mr. Joseph Ochieno, who is a political commentator and a UPC ideologue. Joseph, always a pleasure having you on the show.
And always a pleasure to be here with you. Delighted to be flanked by my young friend and, of course, Dr. Matembe, but, of course, to confirm that I'm a very shy guy.
Oh, really? Because of Honorable Matembe now? Oh, no. He will explain it to you better later. Last but not least is Honorable Moses Biabogisha, who is a lawyer and a politician, actually smiling at the comments made by Mr. Ochieno. I hope you're not as shy as Mr. Ochieno.
No, I'm not shy. I'm just impressed and amused that of all the people here in the introduction, it is only him who has the title of my good friend from the host.
My good friend Moses!
But yes, I'm happy to
Thank you very much. Yes. So, gentlemen and Honorable Dr. Matembe, I'll start with you, Dr. Ojambo. Of course, so much. The last couple of weeks, we've actually been talking about EAC and the Dr. Kizza Besigye and Haj Lutale abduction and the arraignment in court, the denial of a practicing license for Senior Counsel Martha Karua, and so on. And this is something that continues to evolve. And I know we're talking about EAC and the movement of labor and goods, but also, if you followed the last 2 or 3 days, there has been quite a heated conversation across the legal fraternity between Uganda and Kenya. The Kenyan Law Society saying they are actually thinking of petitioning higher authorities to actually ban the movement of Ugandan advocates to practice in Kenya. We've seen statements by the East African Law Society as well, basically reinforcing the stand by the Kenyan Law Society. We've seen the Ugandan Law Society equally put up a spirited fight to actually defend the rule of law and the spirit of the East African Community Treaty and so on. Let's just start by your quick thoughts. I think a little later I'll probably get time and read some of those messages that came through, the statements from all these legal actors. But I could like to hear from you, Dr. Robert. I know you've been following these events keenly as well. Your quick thoughts in about 5 minutes.
Now, the East African community is a two-faced object. The first face is the people. The people of East Africa don't have any problem. In fact, if you travel to Kenya, you travel to Tanzania, you travel to Rwanda, and many of these countries other than South Sudan. South Sudan is a little bit unique. The people there are not very friendly to non-South Sudanese like these other countries. So the people don't have a problem. In fact, on Saturday, I'm going to bury one of my relatives in a town called Nambale. Is about 70 kilometers from the border, and I guess I'm going to drive there and I'll go there and not have any problem with anybody. But the other face is the government. from its inception, even the old one of the Nyereres and the Obotis, there have always been that political problem amongst them. And the biggest issue is the ego of the leaders. Has been the major effect of the East African community, the ego of the leaders. You remember the other one collapsed mainly because of the disagreement between Nyerere and Amin in Uganda. And also Kenyatta never took it serious. He never took the East African community as a serious thing. Recently, you have seen a lot of quarrels between Kagame and Kikwete, Kagame and the leader of Burundi, Museveni and Kagame, and many others. And these things have not been good. For example, these days it's very difficult to have a summit of presidents of East African community sitting, and all of them are there. They will send a minister of foreign affairs, a minister of defense to represent the president. Of recently, it's very difficult to find a meeting where there is both Kagame and Yoweri Museveni, or where there is the president of Burundi and Kagame, or where there is, so you will find maybe Suluhu and Ruto, then the other one is not there. Like recently, or if you watched carefully, the Arusha, the one which was in Arusha recently, it was as if our president had gone to lecture the others. And they were being lectured like children, being told the history of movement of people, the cultures and habits in Uganda. And I looked at that thing and I said, is this an Eldazi council meeting? So there is always that pull and force. Now, when it comes to law, or what they have signed to, and the good thing we have two lawyers here, they are going to explain that legal part. The law is written and signed, but in most cases we don't fulfill. For example, I normally see at Arusha most times complaints when the IALA is sitting, the parliament is sitting. There is a lot of complaint. You find that in most times, not all members have paid up. They don't pay in time. Recently, they were in Uganda here. They failed twice to raise quorum to discuss things, and you wonder what is wrong with this. So, the East African community is already something that has a lot of challenges. But I want to tell you, the East African community of the people is very, very strong. The people are moving from Uganda to Rwanda. For example, if you go to border areas, there are people who go to dig in the opposite country. You go to dig the other side and you come back to stay this way. Do you need a charter on that? I don't know. The traders are doing well, although there are problems, especially there have been problems between Uganda and Kenya on some of the products such as milk and maize, where our maize is declared to be of low standards, and yet sometimes it's not very easy to confirm whether what they are saying is correct. There have been a lot of problems. But the last thing I want to end with is meddling in other people's affairs. When you look at the conflict between Burundi and Rwanda is on that basis. The conflict which was there between Uganda and Rwanda, where the border of Rwanda and Uganda was closed for over 2 years, was because of complaints that each of these countries were meddling in the other's affair. For example, Kagame complained. There's a young colleague of mine who has written 2 papers in that effect, called Edward Kawesi. I would refer people to read those papers. He has verbatim quotes of these 2 presidents complaining, where Uganda was complaining that its people are being haunted in Rwanda, and the vice versa. And that is one of the problems we hear. We have never confirmed because that matter was later released. That's why Kaihura had issues, because it was alleged that Kaihura was abducting, was arresting Rwandese, and they were in so many places where they didn't know, and a number of soldiers were charged along with him. Unfortunately, I was shocked that later this matter was resolved and all the charges were dropped. Does it mean that that matter was removed? So the East African community is a relationship that is living in real terms. You can compare it with trying to mix water with the paraffin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ojambo. Honorable Dr. Matembe, let me just hear your quick thoughts about this whole development. But specifically, I mean, before we came on the show, you told me you would be more interested in talking about the legal issues and, of course, also the human side of some of the decisions that we see being made, either by the president or by the judiciary and so on. Just your quick thoughts.
Actually, thank you very much, and thank you, listeners. I think I do agree with the doctor here about the whole issue of East African integration. In fact, the people of African people. I don't know why, one of the reasons why African people cannot unite and be together, a fact that is causing our suffering in the whole continent, is the issue of self-centeredness and selfishness by our leaders. You can see that our leaders are not driven in leadership by service to the people. They are not. If they were concerned about the people whom they lead, they would know the importance of the community, of the unity. Like now within East Africa, if these leaders were driven by the need to have their people, people-centered, if in their leadership they were people-centered and service-oriented, then they would know the importance of our unity within this region to be able to serve the people and improve the well-beings of their people. But for them, what drives them is their own personal interest. For instance, our president actually all along, he had been wanting East African community so that he may be the president of the, of the East African region. I'm telling you, and as long as he sees he's not going to be the president, then his interest in the whole matter reduces. And as you said, the people themselves, after all, they were together before they were cut, like those people who live at the borders, border to Rwanda, border to Kenya. They are the same, even tribes on the other side and on this side. For them, it doesn't matter, the whole area. It would be better for them to go and sell their things near there rather than even coming all the way to Kampala, because this is Uganda. For them, they are okay. But the leaders, because for them they are driven by what am I going to get out of that. And that's why this whole of integration has taken so long. Let me tell you, when I was telling President Museveni, when after we had parted company, and he called some of us to tell us to join him. And I was telling him, you finished your term. Why don't you rest and some other people, like the Constitution says, come on? He said, you know what, I can't rest until I get the East African integration. I can never rest. That's what that man was telling me. I have forgotten the words he used, but it appeared like he can't, even in his grave, he will not be there if East African community has not been integrated. Do you know what? This is more than 20 years. When he was telling me that. Now, what is it that has stopped the full integration of East African community where it has one president, one, like they were thinking? Yes. What is it? Because, in fact, one time when we were asking, I was in Kituo cha Katiba, and we went there with Professor Sempe, where we are on a consultation to ask to see whether the people of the different countries, by the way, whether they know this integration, what it means to them. And by the way, unless you are a businessman, unless you are what, the rest of the people, even those people, Arusha town, when we were talking of East African integration, they said, what is that?
Yeah.
Even in Arusha, people are not mobilized. People, those near there, they see the benefits. But outside, because if we're interested in this integration, then we would mobilize our people so that we know that you are one people. You know, when I would reach Kenya at the border, at the airport, and they tell me, when are you going back? I tell them, but I'm here. This is East Africa. I'm here. They say, no, you tell us how many days. Now you would say, so where is the integration? Where is it? So when these leaders reach there and find, for them what is driving them somehow, when they say integration, then they get what they want, but they don't want the real integration. Because maybe when all East African people are united as a people with a citizen, we may overthrow them because we are all together, we want to enjoy. So for them, they pick what they think is good for them, and they cover up, say this is integration, when in fact it is not. So people, I remember when we were interviewing people, some in Tanzania were saying, we don't want the President Museveni will bring us, this integration will bring us wars. For us, we don't want to fight. But your man is a fighter, he will bring wars here. And then another thing I think in Tanzania, they told us that you people, you are more professionals, you'll come here and take our jobs. And then also, I think the Ugandans were saying that these Kenyans are shrewd. They will bring all their products when for ours are not, well enough to export them. So all these things, people were raising such issues as against the integration. And if like the leaders knew all those issues, then they would act in such a way that the people themselves, whoever they are, would be interested in this integration, and then they would know the benefits of integration, and then it will down the road become a real East African integration. But it is the leaders, that's why they can't mobilize the whole thing so that we all know, because we would be okay, no passport. Now we have East African passport. Now when I reach there, why should they ask me when I'm coming back if East Africa belongs to me? So these are the things. But what has happened now, I was really thinking, how Amin was overthrown? Because when he was here, and of course when Amin took over, and Obote was not, Nyerere was not happy, and because Obote ran to Tanzania, and so Nyerere thought, I cannot deal with this dictator, Amin. And that's why the East African community broke down. And actually, even then, it broke down, but Nyerere did not have powers to come and overthrow Amin. But Amin, because of his, I think it was also God's doing. As I was telling you, for us, when we pray, God comes in. Because we were suffering so much, I think because of our prayers, Amin went and behaved like now this Museveni has done, going to Kenya to arrest people from Kenya, violating their territorial integrity. Went to Tanzania and encroached there, encroached on Nyerere's land. And that one gave him the leeway and the right to come and invade Uganda. He had been waiting to do that, but because there was still sanity, when insanity entered into Amin and he went and invaded Tanzania, that's how he came to be overthrown. And so, the way we are suffering now, we never know what God could be engineering. We shall talk more about that.
Thank you, Doctor. Joseph, your quick thoughts also in about 5 minutes.
I have to start with something that Dr. Matemba has just said, and that is the motivations around these. And this because it's not sufficiently recorded, and many of our histories are not sufficiently recorded, and it's very important. Dr. Matemba, as it happens apparently, once Amin did the mess that he did in terms of the invasion of Tanzania and the mistreatment of the Tanzanians at Kagera salient, and considering the nature of the peoples who the Tanzanians are, generally, that's to their credit apparently, even in the tradition of East Africa, there's slightly much more of the modest, PC kind of stuff. Amin came pompous and boastful, conquered and basically beat off these people. Nyerere gets the report firsthand. Now, the most critical bit was intelligence briefing to Nyerere on two fronts. One, the extremes of Idi Amin and his arrogance. Now, this 8 years later they've been dealing. But specifically, according to Dr. Bote and other records, Nyerere felt so humiliated as a country, felt so humiliated as an individual, and so felt so much pain by the manner in which Idi Amin had treated the people of Kagera Salient, that he came in the briefing with Dr. Bote and said, look, you know what? What this guy has done, he's crossed the line beyond the line. And so he went back for further military briefing, and he said that when he got the advisory report that they had the capacity, considering what was now happening, to move up to Kampala. Nyerere said that, so he said to Dr. Bote that, well, he has resolved, that not only is it about their capacity together with the URLF guys, that they're actually going to not only push Amin hard, but push him up to the extreme end of Tanzania. Meaning, there is always a borderline, something that slashes. And really, dictators and guys who do impunity ought to know that. I thought I would start with that. But that said also, it takes me back to 1969 Milton Obote's speech to the members of the East African Legislative Assembly at the time, Ugandan. And that video did the rounds recently. And the rounds were suggesting that, look, you are going to Arusha to represent Uganda. You must be the best of Uganda. Of course, you're the best of Uganda as ambassadors there. But it was instructed, the speech is there somewhere online. Once you reach Arusha, you must know that you'll be representing the interest of East Africa, not the interest of Uganda.
Yes.
Now, I thought in 1969, that was massively powerful. And to consider what Dr. Matembe refers, that over 20 years ago, Museveni was telling her that telling them, of course, this is something which is familiar to all of us, that Museveni was saying East Africa, East Africa, East Africa. So this is 20 years ago. But you can imagine that the first East Africa collapsed within 10 years. And by the collapse by 10 years in 1967, and those are those days, with men and predominantly men, with a few women, with the sufficient technology and access and history and background foundation, these guys had already substantially harmonized East African community, sufficient understanding, sufficient integration, both culture and everything else, building onto a preparation for a possibility of one United States of East Africa, notwithstanding the differences. Now, away from the common understanding of ideological links closer to Obote and Nyerere and this the Pan-Africanist agenda, and what Dr. Jambo quite rightly says, that the least interested party was Kenyatta. That's, for the records, true. Kenyatta was an imperialist stooge and a poodle at the time for quite a long time. That's official from an African's perspective. But by and large, he was an East African. And that brings some of the reservations about the Kenyan approach to this. But these two leaders, together with other African leaders, were genuinely consciously saying what the two learned doctors were saying, that look, Africa had been broken up like sweets from 1884, or 1884, the Berlin Conference. And we need to reintegrate. Beyond our independence, we need to reintegrate and be taking our people closer together. And how do we make it possible that faster beyond 1963, when we formed the Organization of African Unity, beyond a one government overnight, how do we regionally do it? These guys had a purpose, Judy. These guys had a mission, but these guys had the peoples, with the peoples at heart. Now, fast forward to this bunch, who then come up in the name of reintegration, recreating of East Africa, the new East Africa formation. Can you imagine that we talked about 25 years the other day? And for 25 years, you cannot see an iota of anything that these guys have done that the first community of 10 years did not do. And then you talk about, again, the findings of the Dr. Matembes, as it were. I was telling, I think this program, of course, this topic was discussed, but it's important within the context of Mouthland, and forgive me, I'll be brief on this. I don't know who the Secretary General of this African community is today. I don't know if I can name 3 members of Uganda's Legislative Assembly to Arusha? I don't know. I don't know who the key members of those executives are. I don't know how many political science professors or history professors in Uganda's mainstream universities, how many of them can actually count 5 ministers, cabinet ministers of Kenya? I'm very confident about it. And how many of them can count 5 cabinet ministers of Tanzania? And Dr. Jambo is excluded, you know, or any other from the other
I was going to challenge you.
But indeed, as it were, as young students, what's you're talking about, as young pupils actually in primary schools, not only did we have sufficient understanding of the East African community that time, but we knew who the leaders, the cabinets were, notwithstanding these days where ministers are advisors from dancing and things like that, not even that, but genuinely from the other country and what's happening. There's no clue, and that's why I've argued that in future, whatever course the discussion we're having, maybe we need to review the relationship with East Africa. Maybe there need to be a cheeky way in which perhaps there's even a threat that we suspend, you know, the operations of the community, and maybe Kenya doesn't protest. If only Ruto had not been a kudo of Mr. Museveni is doing the bad student. Because maybe we needed a major diplomatic spark between Kenya and Uganda, so that we reignite the reformation of the East African community and review as a result of this, so that the new start is one in which there is not only harmonization, but respect, you know, for the protocols of the community, the legislative frameworks for the respective neighboring countries, so that our citizens are able to review. Because in any case, original East African community, the 3 member states, cannot even today have a harmonized position. Moreover, on something legal, the humiliation of Martha Karua, a lawyer, a top lawyer, the humiliation of a woman of merit in East Africa, a would-be vice president. Martha Karua is a possibility of a future president of Kenya. In fact, Martha Karua is almost certainly, possibly the next first president of East African community. And then the Musevenis who want to hold it for themselves can't believe it. So these are important citizens for our community. You don't humiliate them and mistreat them like. And finally, Kizza Besigye, an important partner of the part of the NRA thing of theirs. But most importantly, once upon a time, a revered leader, official leader of the democratic opposition in Uganda. You know, you do not treat them like that. To conclude, in 1989, just as I had escaped from Makerere and I was a refugee, actually, an exile in UK. So I came to visit East Africa. So I came to Nairobi, and then I went to Tanzania. So on my way back from Tanzania by road from Namanga, there's a quick story, interesting. In the taxi, Museveni had issues with the Moi at the time. There was a brief thing. You're too young to remember this.
87.
89. So there was a diplomatic issue. So in the taxi, I was seated behind. There was a Muzungu and there was an Asian. These guys were not asked, they just looked at their passport and they were not asked to leave. So for me, who was seated behind, I was a young, handsome student, as you can imagine, at the time, shy. You know, and shy. Very innocent, as it were. But you know, so the Kenyan police asked me all the way to come out to be checked. And I took exception. So you have to check me, and then before the taxi could leave. And I said, officer, of course now in English, unfortunately, my sufficient Swahili, I took exception. Why was I the only person who was pulled out of this? It's got to be in my memories. Why was I the only person who was pulled out of this taxi? You know, and in any case, I think I'm almost sort of the youngest person, so the most innocent person here. But I'm Ugandan. What about those two? There's that Muzungu thing. So why? So I was still, and I said, not only that, I am an East African. 1989. I said, no. The guys went, Mom. The guy said it was fidgeting to make an apology, but I already made my point. I went to the taxi. You know what? We went to the taxi. Up to Nairobi, nobody said a single word.
Thank you.
So,
yes.
no, Africans, we can do better as East Africa, as East Africa as a foundation. We must do better urgently as a continent, and particularly for those funny men out there who pretend and relate that they're Pan-Africanists.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joseph. Honorable Bia Mugisha, I think everyone has been giving their insights, and I'm curious to actually know, to hear from you, your contribution to this discussion, please.
Thank you very much. From the lawyer's perspective, and then as far as the East African community is concerned, we have made our proposals. One, in form of the mutual agreement, mutual recognition agreement, which is basically a framework for recognition and standardization of legal practice by lawyers in East Africa. It's a proposal that is still being considered at the East African Community Secretariat. We have made proposals in a bill called the East African Cross-Border Legal Practice Bill. That bill has also not been assented to. And I think the incident of Martha Karua in Kampala is now refocusing our mind on those two frameworks to call upon state parties to consider these proposals and actualize them. Because, you know, when I was joining law school at Uganda Christian University in 2008, I had issues. Then I decided first try, before I went to UCU, I decided first try my luck at Dar es Salaam Law School. So I went to Dar es Salaam Law School and I did interviews, and I could notice that young lawyers from, young students from Uganda, we are not finding it easy at Dar es Salaam Law School. Actually, we went there, a big number of us, over 20 of us, but I don't recall who of us made it. And yet we had the qualifications. So they were a bit jittery to welcome us. So we have come a long...
And yet, sorry, yet originally, all the lawyers, Ugandan lawyers, were studying in Dar es Salaam.
Exactly.
Which is the point I nearly made.
Interesting.
Exactly. Now, at Nairobi, at the back also of Nairobi, as you know that we have been having challenges with our road development center in Kampala in terms of space and the few numbers, but with the growing numbers of qualified graduate law students, now most Ugandans have been pursuing their career at the bar, to do their bar course in Nairobi. Now, when this incident of Martha Karua happened, like you stated earlier, Nairobi, the Kenyan Law Society said, oh, so wait a minute. We have been so kind, in the spirit of East Africa, we have been so kind to non-Kenyans to come and study and practice law in Kenya. And most of those non-Kenyans are actually, majority of them are Ugandans.
Yeah.
But
I have a daughter there.
yes,
Oh.
we have one of us, a senior counsel. To be called the senior counsel is a process.
Yes.
It is not in terms of age, it is a process. Martha Karua
Approved by the president.
Yes, is a senior counsel in Kenya. And she has those other qualities that you alluded to politically. So for her to come and bring her documents here, and she is flatly rejected with very funny reasons. Flimsy. No hearing, no nothing. Doesn't augur well with the East Africa, with the spirit of East Africa. And it is throwing a spanner in our process of integration in terms of legal practice as lawyers. So it is something that is now forcing us to go on the drawing board. And do you know what is funny? In the year 2000, when Dr. Yossi Jatukum petitioned the court in a presidential election.
Yes.
There is this, by then he was, I think, around 80-something years. There was some lawyer, Kenyan lawyer.
Yes.
Yes, I've forgotten. His name, I think, something. I've forgotten the real names. Museveni hired that gentleman to come here and be his lead counsel.
That's right, yes.
That gentleman came here, handled the presidential election petition for Museveni as his lead counsel. Now, you get so shocked that when, in other words, at that time, President Museveni knew the importance of representation. He knew that it is everyone's right to appoint a lawyer of your choice. But here is Dr. Besje who says, I want to have Martha Karua as my lead counsel. and they are saying no, she's from Kenya, but even then, what is she coming to add? It is so unkind of the Judicial Service Commission, the Law Council in Uganda, to begin to say, what is Martha Karua going to add on Besigye's case? It is so unfair because it then undermines the right of Dr. Besigye to appoint the lawyers that he wants. People, Ugandans must understand why Dr. Besigye is insisting on Martha Karua. And by the way, on Martha Karua, as the lead counsel for Dr. Besigye, it's a red line. It is either her or it's her. Besigye has made that very clear. Why? One, Dr. Besigye left here to Kenya to attend the launch of Martha Karua's book. Martha Karua is in the same organization, platform, with Dr. Besigye that puts together leaders of democratic opposition democratic forces in Africa. Martha Karua is part of the Pan-African Lawyers Forum. Now that's why you see we have got a lawyer who came in recently from Angola. Mm-hmm. She's part of the Pan-African Lawyers Forum. They are all coming in here to say, no. Issues of justice, issues of Pan-Africanism are important for all of us. So back to the East African community, it speaks to the, I think my senior colleague talked about the two faces of the East African community, the politicians or the leaders, and then the people. Mm-hmm. The leaders are being dishonest about the integration process. The question of ego that my colleagues talked about earlier seems to be the driving force in all this. Now, they want to integrate, to show signs of integration when it is convenient for them. I can imagine when Museveni was sending his soldiers to Nairobi to arrest Besigye, he was invoking the spirit of East Africa. But again, they forget that indeed there is a protocol that, and also there are also international human rights laws that explain how you get a foreigner to be tried in another country. There should be extradition, and that should be a process through courts. If Besigye had guns in Kenya, then the Kenyan courts, Milimani police should have arrested him and taken him to Kenyan courts. These other cases in Geneva, when did the Ugandan courts, more so the court martial, assume universal powers to try international laws? It's very funny. Geneva, Switzerland. So yes, we are
which offense?
Yes, we are dealing with an issue of dishonesty of that other face of the East African integration of our leaders who are not honest. 20 years down the road, we've not seen the East African airline, the East African railways, the what that these other guys achieved in 10 years. So these ones are simply being honest.
Thank you very much, Honorable Biamogisha. On the issue of Pan-Africanism, of course, we seem to see a contradiction. We have a president who, on one hand, purports to be Pan-Africanist and is interested in promoting Pan-African values. But on the other hand, like Honorable Biamogisha just gave the example of the Angolan advocate who just joined the Dr. Kizza Besigye's legal team, you have this contradiction of a president who is not actually promoting or accepting integration, whether it's at the regional level, within the East African community or at the regional level. He seems averse to this kind of work. So then you basically see the Pan-Africanist. So I mean, how strong then would you be promoting one aspect, the Pan-Africanism that he talks about, yet on the other hand, he seems to not be actually very willing to embrace it in every sense of the word.
Yeah, Judith, just give me a minute to just say a few things about what my colleagues have said. One of it is I had an argument with my professor when I was doing my terminal degree on the word civilization. He was saying this world is derogatory. So we were arguing whether we should continue using it, civilization, to mean this group is okay and the other. So as I was interrogating that word, I came across a statement that if you want to know how a country is civilized, you see it how it treats its two categories of people: the old people and the children. And the explanation is that the old people are the ones who have built what we have today.
Yes.
They are the ones who have built what we have today, and therefore they must be respected for what they have done. And in every civilized country, you will go, you find in a bus there is a seat for the elderly. You go to the bank, you find there is a place for the elderly, and so on. They are respecting that. The children, you want to nurture them because they hold the future. They are the ones who will build the future. Now, in countries like Uganda, I would want to categorize them, then you will see whether they are civilized or not civilized. Just as Dr. Matembe and Ocheno said, if you see how they treat former politicians in Uganda, you then see that there is a very big problem. Because I thought a man like Dr. Kizza Besigye should not be treated like any Ojambo somewhere, because this is a man who had a huge contribution to this country. Then look at our children. Our children in Uganda, they are the ones who eat last. They are the ones who eat leftover. They are the ones who eat nothing, and so on and so forth. That is one. But two, the other thing I've also gotten from these people, which now leads to what you are asking, is the pretense of the leaders. In my view, it is not pretense. These people do what they intend to do, only that they will deceive you. Like the Honorable Matembes, and it's a pleasure that today we are with you on the same platform. I've been just listening to you. Honorable Matembe was a commissioner during the constitutional making process. And they said in Article number 1 that all power belongs to the people. And I think for them, they were very honest. They thought they are doing the right thing. But the leader, and that is the midwife of the Constitution, I call him in my studies the midwife of the Constitution, Yoweri Museveni, added there another phrase, which you did not put in the Constitution, but in practice it works. Power belongs to the people who have guns. And that is what I've been seeing in my adult life in Uganda. I don't know in Kenya, but in Uganda, if you don't have a gun, you are not considered to be a very powerful person. And that's why, for example, if you read the letter, if you read the explanation of the president, why court-martial should be there, he argues that court-martial has helped to resolve a lot of problems. Security and stabilization of the country. That these courts, can you imagine that from magistrate court to Supreme Court, the president finds that they cannot do the work of adjudicating criminals or convicting criminals or whatever you would want to use it. And that's why, in his wisdom, in 2005, they came up with the military court-martial. And he says 900 people are in Chitalia because they have been sentenced in Karamoja by the court-martial. So you really see a person who is naughty, who does not want to do the right things that are in the Constitution. All these courts are put in our country here by acts of the Constitution. By the way, each one of them, the magistrate court have an article, the high courts have an article, the Court of Appeal has an article, the Supreme Court has an article. Now, having said that, going back to your question of Pan-Africanism, she talked about, and I remember Matembe used to be our representative in the African Pan-African.
We actually
yes. Even when you were honorable,
yes,
you
we
were our
the ones who
representative.
established it.
Yes.
We are the pioneers.
Yes.
I was part of the pioneer.
And the thinking was that we wanted
Parliament.
to allow people understand us. Pan-Africa means one Africa. One Africa where we do things in the same way in Ubuntu traditions. Now, Ubuntu traditions demand fairness. If you read the Ubuntu tradition, demand fairness, demand justice, demand peace. They don't demand war. They don't demand the opposite, those things. So our leaders have issues, and that's why you see the East African community has had issues. I lived in Tanzania for quite some time because I was a student there for 5 years. And it helped me to study the Tanzanian system very carefully. In Tanzania, they are very humble people, but they don't like East Africans. If you go there, you cannot stay in Tanzania without a permit. They will give you 3 weeks for you to go and get a resident permit at their immigration office. Any Ugandan who has been there knows what I'm talking about. And if you are found and taken to court, you will be charged and they will take you to Segerea for 2 years. Many Ugandans are in jail there because of permits, not having permits. You can't work in Tanzania if you don't have a work permit. Whether you are a professor, whether you are what, you cannot work there. And it is known. In fact, for us who go to Tanzania, it is where you get a long sentence, almost warning you that in 3 weeks, please go and process a permit. If it is extended, it can go only up to 90 days. After 90 days, you have committed an offense to stay there. In Tanzania, most of the things are not done the way we do things here. The state is very powerful in Tanzania. Once the state rules against you, you are in terrible issues. Now, Kenya, because of being business-oriented, sometimes they allow certain things quietly. But remember, during Moi's time, there was something they called makanyago. Makanyago meant that you are found in Kenya without permission, without any permission. And that's why you see in the early 1990s, there were a lot of problems between Uganda and Kenya. In Sudan, we discussed Sudan last time. I don't want to waste a lot of time. There is warga. If you are found in South Sudan without warga, anybody can maul you. In Rwanda, Rwanda is a very complicated country. Very, very complicated, especially if you come from Western Uganda. At least if you come from Northern Uganda, wherever, you can have some peace in Rwanda. But if you come from Western Uganda, our Ugandans have suffered there. So are Rwandese. Judith, Rwandese, people who have Rwandese origin are suffering at our immigration office in Kampala here. They can be asked very hard questions. In fact, very many have been denied passports. And yet, you see, beginning in 1920s, there are so many people who came from Rwanda and were naturalized here as Ugandans. We have lived with them, but you find how they are treated. So you cannot talk about Pan-Africanism when there are still problems such as what I've enumerated. The other problem, which is so much affecting Pan-Africanism, most of our leaders want one Africa, and they should be the leaders. And that is the conflict that came up between Thabo Mbeki, Muammar Gaddafi, and Yoweri Museveni. Each one of them was looking at themselves as the probable leader. And therefore, slowly problems started to crop up between Museveni and Gaddafi. By the time Gaddafi died, you need to read Museveni's statements that he was talking about Gaddafi. I advised him to do this, and he refused. I advised to do this, and he refused. And that's why Gaddafi was isolated and later killed by those people. Thabo Mbeki, for him being who he is, for Thabo Mbeki is a very good, is a scholar. He understood the mind of these people and pulled out and went and became a common man in South Africa, only to give comments today. So with these leaders of ours who are self-seekers, because if you want to be a Pan-Africans, you must follow the Ubuntu philosophy. The Ubuntu philosophy means you must be humble, you must be peaceful, you must be loving, you must be good at assisting one another. Our leaders want to see how they benefit from a country. Just see how we are treating Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. All of us are culprits. Uganda, Angola, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Rwanda, and so on. If you may not know, 30 years ago, we did not have smartphones in the world. And it is because the mineral, Mobutu had refused to sell that mineral that makes smartphones called coltan and others. They ganged against this man and removed him. And today, you can see how Democratic Republic of Congo has been shared. It has army lords governing different parts of the country. Nobody bothers about the people of Congo. If you go to Changwali and most of our refugee camps, majority of the people there are people of Congo origin. But what even surprises you, that even the ones who come from Congo, many of them, I was disagreeing here with the Mwambusia one time, and I just decided to leave it, are of Rwandese origin. People who ran away from Rwanda and went to take refuge in Congo. Now they have been pushed from Congo to Uganda. You cannot build Pan-Africanism when you still have such problems. Finally, the issue of trade has also created problems. In Pan-Africanist understanding of trade is the exchange of goods and services. If you get a profit, it should be just a by the way. Africans did not believe, I think Honorable Matembe here is our senior person here, will tell you that in the village people sold the sorghum because he wants to get milk, not to cheat the other one and become rich. Now, with the adoption of the capitalist society, capitalism depends on the strong exploiting the weak. With that in Africa, now it is difficult to talk about Pan-Africanism. So it is also an issue. But let's now go final and talk about this court thing, the Martha Karua thing, because it's the thing which has brought us here.
Yes, yes.
It is unfortunate. It's unfortunate that politicians are meddling into legal issues. Because, you see, when they were coming up with this constitution, which has separation of power, the aim of it is to balance, because you have a very strong executive. It has the army, it has the police, it has all sorts of things. If you leave it alone, it is going to use its forces to undermine justice, to undermine freedom, and all those things. So you have the judiciary to come there and neutralize, and of course the executive to make the laws so that the judiciary can interpret them. But in Africa, the executive wants to be the judiciary, wants to be the executive, and wants to be the parliament. And that's why, for example, I was very sure that they were not going to allow Martha Karua to go to that court. First of all, the court itself is incapacitated. I have been following it up. When you see that tribunal or committee, whatever they call it, it is incapacitated. Its whole thing does not base on only law. In fact, if you want it to be very weak, you take it, restrict it to law. Now, they were wondering, and I heard that man ask a question, that you want 50 lawyers for what? And I was asking, is there a limit? If you call yourself a court, do you say we want a limit again? If I bring my 100 lawyers, what is the problem? The panel, the court is empaneled by generals who do not have any idea of the law, with a few advocates, army advocates. So, if you take their matters of law, it is very clear that they are going to lose. For them, they use matters of the military. Number two, many Ugandans have asked a question that if this court is illegal, Why do you insist to go there? No, I think these people want to expose it. And Martha was going to be one of the people to expose this thing. Because Martha has been an advocate for over 30 years. Was an advocate during Jomo Kenyatta's time. That's when she was a student. She graduated during Moi's time. Moi, you know Moi the man. And Moi, with the Museveni, the only difference was the approach. Moi used not to use a lot of army, but he would use the underhand methods.
Okay, Doctor, let's maybe proceed.
So finally, what I'm saying is that Martha came on that spirit of Pan-Africanism, but the people in Kampala do not believe in that.
Thank you. So on Wednesday also, just to make mention, you talked about the message that the President Museveni released basically to justify this trial of civilians in military courts and so on. I also just wanted to remind us that on Wednesday, the Supreme Court ruled that the Court of Appeal does not have jurisdiction to hear cases from the military courts. I don't know if you're all aware of that. And also, Honorable Biamugisha,
I beg your pardon on that?
The Supreme Court ruled that the Court of Appeal does not have jurisdiction to hear cases from the military court. So if you were tried in the military court and say you want to appeal, you cannot go to the Court of Appeal, basically. It does not have the powers to hear that.
Which has the powers to hear it? What does that
That is
mean?
ridiculous.
Yes, so that was the ruling.
So if you don't mind, actually on air, it's a conversation we can share because we're just having a conversation prior to.
Yeah. So I think I can just read. So the Uganda Supreme Court has ruled that the Court of Appeal does not have the jurisdiction to entertain cases from the UPDF Court Martial Appeals Court.
That was in relation with which case?
There was a case of a soldier who had appealed, who had been on murder, and he had appealed the ruling. So the ruling came after a UPDF soldier, Second Lieutenant Ogwang Ambrose, appealed to the Supreme Court to quash a murder sentence that he had been handed by the military court. So he ran to the Court of Appeal, hoping that they could overturn that ruling. They did not. And then the Supreme Court now says the Court of Appeal does not have that jurisdiction. Yes.
Dr. Matembe,
So,
as a matter of interest, we're having a conversation, possibly not on this platform, and there was a lawyer called friend of ours who's NRM, in NRM Canada actually. And the argument then was that what we were having earlier, Judith, that the court martial, with all its standings, would try, obviously serving military officers without detail.
Yeah.
And then from there, that the appeal process is that there is an internal appeal process. And that if that appeal process fails, then the person has got a right now to appeal into the mainstream civilian court. And part of the argument was it High Court or was it the Court of Appeal? Now, interestingly, since this is an ongoing debate, because this must be another new breaking news story, therefore, if the Supreme Court has ruled against that, it means that, one, is it that people tried under court-martial have got no alternative remedy beyond a court of...
the verdict handed over to them by the court-martial.
By the court-martial, or does it go to the High Court? If they're saying it does not go to the Court of Appeal, what is it? I think this is a vagueness that, as we're on air, it must be recorded.
So I could just read another paragraph that says, this is now what the judges were saying. Professor Lilian Tibatemwa says, it is intriguing to know that nowhere does the UPDF Act mention the role of civilian courts in its appellate frameworks and hierarchy.
That's very interesting, yeah.
Then the inference is that it can be inferred that since the UPDF Act is silent on the role of civilian courts, no jurisdiction is conferred upon them.
But this is very strange. I mean, I am being provoked. I'm not a practicing lawyer. I studied law. But I want to know which is Supreme Court compared to any other court in Uganda. What is a Supreme Court? I thought a Supreme Court is the final. And let me tell you, when we are making the Constitution, Actually, some people had wanted that if it is a constitutional case, a political, that the political cases or constitutional, which go to constitutional court,
Yes.
those which are related to the violation or something of the constitution, interpretation and
Or
so
election
on,
matters or things
they
like that.
had wanted it stop at the Court of Appeal. I remember me and a few people arguing that no, we cannot prevent anybody from reaching the final court, the Supreme Court. Because until you reach the Supreme Court, then you rest because you have went to
You
the
believe
highest
you've
court in
exhausted,
Uganda. But
reasonable
you
hearing.
cannot, I can't understand, I'm not a judge, I'm not an advocate I'm a lawyer. I made a constitution of Uganda, but I know there are certain, if you use the word supreme, that means that is the court
ultimate
that has the
decision maker.
final say. Now, if I hear the court which has a final say saying that because the court martial law, the act, does not provide for appeal to any court, it means that these people are finished. Does it mean that they are finished? I thought that since there is a lacuna in that law, the Supreme Court will use its own powers
To give
to
direction.
fill
In
the
the very
gap.
least, in the very least,
Yes,
So
to give
they-
the direction to judicial. The lawyer, the practicing lawyer is here.
Yeah.
I'm now talking as a person who also knows the law and who is also a politician who made the constitution, who contributed to all these things we are discussing. And when we are driven by justice, that justice must prevail. Justice in this country must prevail. You talked of the politicians, they make the law, the executives implement the law, and in the implementation of the law or in the making of the law, one, they make things which are wrong, then it is the judiciary which is the final answer to a Ugandan. The Supreme Court has the final answer to a Ugandan who is in this country and needs justice. And I cannot see how a Supreme Court throws this Ugandan into space like that.
So when
that is too strange. I think we don't have to discuss that today.
Yeah, no,
what
no, but,
brought us were other
is-
things.
I just
But
wanted to make mention
that
of
is
it.
opening a door to actually for Ugandans to really shout that enough is enough. Because, and coming to that, although you had not asked me, me wanted to come in on this issue. You are talking, the leaders of Africa, East African leaders. Me, I want now to go down to the Ugandan leader. Because the matter we are dealing with in this case concerns the Ugandan leader. And we are talking of a person, you are talking of Ubuntu, peace, justice, and so on. Somebody who prides himself in calling himself Sabarwani means that he's here to fight everybody. The man came fighting to remove what he called wrong people and bad leadership and wanted to establish democratic leadership. And of course, you know how Besigye was with him in this struggle. You talk of Ubuntu. You think if this Sabarwany had any slightest iota,
make sense to him.
iota of Ubuntu, would he really treat Besigye the way he's treated? We talked of Martha Karua. I'm coming to Martha Karua. But Besigye, the way he's treated, the man who left his education, the man who ran to the bush with all these young people, the Muntu and so on. And because they believed in delivering Uganda, they joined this man. And Besigye himself was even his doctor. And ever since he came here, and we embraced them, we joined to get Uganda into democratic governance. Okay? Yes. Because that's what took Museveni Sabarwany into the bush, to establish democratic governance. Now, when we reached at that level of establishing democratic governance, and he ran back to the bush, to me, he ran back to the bush, and I even told him that you have left the path which we are following, and you've gone to the bush. Why are you calling me to join you in the bush? Because I'm not going to join you there, because me, I wanted establishment of democratic governance. And when we talked of democratic governance, we are seeking of a different view. I mean, people cannot have the same view. Now, if ever since Besigye said, for me, we have reached here, we have done what we've done, this is the time now to establish political parties where each of us should take their own way. From that time, Besigye has suffered simply because he wanted to have his own view or as against the Sabarwanyi view. Now, if this man has Ubuntu, that I wonder, I don't even, for Besigye to be alive, it's God's grace. Because this man has suffered. The other day when I saw him coming out of the vehicle, the first time when they were taking him to court, when Martha was around, I saw this man like he was about to collapse. Like he was about to collapse, and I think even in the prison, he doesn't eat because they may poison him. So all these things, how can one treat a person like that, who was really his doctor, who has committed no crime? And me, as far as I'm concerned, I told you I'm a lawyer, but I'm not a practicing advocate. But I can know that when you bring a charge against somebody, you make the charge clear. What is the charge? And if you go and you are charging somebody for crimes in Sweden or Venezuela, wherever these international places, why didn't they? My question was, why, when he arrived here from those places where he was committing those crimes, which we don't even know, because I don't think they're on the charge sheet, why didn't they arrest him here in Uganda before he went to Kenya? Because when he went from Uganda to Kenya, it was the same day. You can't tell that all of a sudden the information came that he was doing wrong things there, and therefore they followed him in Kenya. And you know what disturbs me is that when this man is drunk, by the way, one time I told him about all this brain being swallowed by the crave for power, to know that he's drunk with power. He thinks the drunkenness with power has, the Bible says that their eyes are harassed. I think it is his brain which is now harassed, that he thinks that all of us are blind. Because I cannot see how you can say that Besigye left the Entebbe airport did he leave with this gun and go to the Nairobi airport? He enters with a gun, and he goes to the hotel and enters with a gun. Yesterday I was going to Silver Springs, and I saw at the entrance Silver Springs, no guns allowed in this hotel. And this is our small hotel there. Do you see guns being allowed in Kenya hotels without any? So this man, for him to come and say that he arrested Besigye with guns in a hotel, wherever he was, is to think that, you know the young children, when she does her face like this, a baby, when they put their hands on the face like this and they are not seeing you, they think you are not seeing them. And this is how this Sabarwan is behaving. He's so tired. He's a military dictator wanting to silence everybody. And the whole reason, I think Ugandans surely should know, that the whole reason is that now, because we are due to go for elections, you see him campaigning in the north everywhere, is because he wants to silence everybody. You see, these people we are becoming active now, saying we are joining a new party and that kind of thing, and he arrests this man, puts him in a military court, he cannot get him be defended. The rest of the people are going to fear and say, oh, why? We need our lives. You see, that is what he's doing, because he has taken over Uganda, taken over the parliament, taken over the judiciary, taken over. Uganda is being ruled by one person. It is a military dictatorship ruled by one person who does not respect the leaders within the region. Because after all, how do you talk of East African integration with a life presidency? Other places, other countries have this term limit. But you go to Kagame and Museveni, they are made of the same blood, you know, the same heritage when you look at them. It is the same heritage of their blood. So for them, they don't have term limit, they are life presidency. Do you expect the other people to feel free with them and trust them, to integrate with them. So all these things, it is our person here. And what hurt me very much was, like you said, this honoring this distinguished young lady. And by the way, for you, you don't know, this distinguished young lady, Ugandan women lawyers, of whom I am, are responsible for nurturing these young women. She was Martha Karua, Martha Kome, who is now the Chief Justice.
Right,
Those are my people. Those who were together, firebrand, people. And for her, she's such a person of integrity. She's driven by service to the people. She's concerned. That's why she has established a network of opposition in Africa to get them together to say, you people, how long are we going to be with these dictators and people who don't want to leave power? And that is one of the reasons why he's now being chased away, because when she was going to participate in launching of her book, and this man knows that woman is mobilizing a network of opposition leaders in Africa. Why shouldn't opposition leaders in Africa network? Why are the governments AU? Isn't AU their network? Is the AU network of opposition? No, it is a network of these government people who kill us and oppress us and root us. Why shouldn't also the opposition people sort of build a network to get together and see how they can build democratic governance in Africa? But that one now angers him, and therefore Martha Karua should be treated like that. I want to end up by I think what should demean, should I call it demean, about blame or condemn. I have no right to condemn. But for me, what disturbs me is all these very leaders who are driven by self-interest. One, the Chief Justice. Two, the Law Council. Do you think if I was the chairperson of the Law Council, do you think I would have listened to Museveni? I would have followed the law, and I would have given Martha Karua a license, and then they would maybe, and then when it is rejected, then if I was the Chief Justice, I would say, yes, it is right for this woman to come and defend us, and I would have passed these judgments like that. And if I lose a job, I lose a job. So, for these the so-called distinguished lawyers in Uganda, who are responsible, like the Law Council, like the Chief Justice, like all these, why shouldn't they sit down and say, no, what do we do as lawyers in this country? Why shouldn't we have power and authority in this country as the land people? Where is the Law Society? Why shouldn't it sit and we say yes, the people must get a license? Why shouldn't we? Because all of them are concerned. They are so scared. They are so self-centered. They are not concerned about service to the people. And that is what is causing a problem. If Ugandans were not like that, those Ugandans in leadership were not like that, Museveni, although with his gun and money, would not have treated us the way he's treating us. But they have allowed to bow. Because of their self-interest. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to be killed. Killed? Who has ever killed me? I lost a job. I lost a job with nothing. I never got pension. I worked for this country 30 good years. And because I disagreed on the term limit, they said, get out of here. Have I starved? Have I been killed? My God is the one who gave me life. He's the one who's responsible for my death or whatever. Why should people fear?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doctor. On that note, we'll take a break.
I really need to go to a break.
Yes.
Just 30 seconds. I'm really, really sorry.
Just
because so that we move on.
Okay, just 30 seconds and we will come back.
Dr. Matembe is making an extremely important point to Ugandans. This business and politics of fear, that how much can we and should we? I just want to put a quick disclaimer. That, do you know what? Dr. Jambo thought Martha was going to be stopped. Do you know, actually, for me, from a political strategy point of view, I actually did not think that Museveni would do it, because I thought it was actually going to be counterproductive, considering the stature of the personality of Martha Karua. And in any case, just a quick one. Is the chairperson the law council justice?
Oh, yeah, correct.
My friend
Muriagonja.
just
You know
Muriagonja.
what?
I feel sorry for her.
I have
and
absolutely huge respect
Trust
for her.
and
In
respect.
fact, I have actually written about her several
That's
times.
me
And in
also.
fact, for the record, actually, Justice Mulagonja, in ruling dismissing Akena and others' case on UPC, that ruling made me respect this woman. She was so thorough, so substantive, that to pick from that, which is a matter in which I'm interested, and then to come and find herself conflicted on the point Dr. Matembe is saying, that at some stage, we as Ugandans will have to move a little bit away from our selfishness.
Yeah.
But you know what? In the Kenya that Dr. Jambo was talking about, at the peak of Moi, I was a young student at the time when Nyayo was an impossible Nyayo. The Kenyan elite, the Kenyan professionals, the Kenyan elite, I repeat, in their respective places, and they simply say, no. People started saying, no, I can't go there, you can't go down there. The more people do
Yes.
that, the more likely Mr. Museveni will think twice
Yes.
before he makes these rather crude decisions, which are quite clearly out of nothing else but excess impunity.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Let's take a break and then we'll be back and pick up the conversation right from where we stopped. This is the Citizens Chat Show. See you shortly.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back from the break and thank you for keeping it with us here on the Citizens Chat Show on Civic Space TV. My name is Judith Atim and we are continuing with our conversation on the future of the East African community given the turbulence regarding free movement of goods and services in the region. And the case we're focusing on is that of Martha Karua's temporary practicing license as Dr. Kiza Besigye and Haj Lutale's lead counsel. So before we went into the break, Joseph, you had just finished your submission. I would like to give the mic now to Honorable Moses Biamugisha. It's been quite a while since we actually heard from you. So just you weigh in on what your colleagues have submitted so far.
Yes. Let me make an addition regarding the court martial, its trials and possible appeals. I have had the privilege to read the UPDF Act. And the UPDF Act is talking about, I think, 3 kinds of courts within the UPDF Act. It's talking about the field court, and it says each division, 4th division, which division is enabled to have a field court. And that field court can take decisions. It also creates the general court martial, now which sits at Makindi. And it says the general court martial can listen to appeals from field court marshals, and it also has a regional jurisdiction to listen to any appeals. And then it talks about the appeal, the court martial appeals court. And it is saying that all other decisions from field and also from the general court martial can be taken to the court martial appeals court. And it stops there. Now, what informed the decision of the Supreme Court by Justice Echiri Kubinza, she alluded to the fact that the UPDF Act does not talk about appeals outside the UPDF Act, outside the military courts. And she says appeals, an appeal is a right of statute. And when the statute is silent on it, it is difficult for a minister to come up with regulations to propose an appeal. I think, there is in law what we call judicial activism. I think the judgment lacks,
Sure.
the judgment lacks some bit of judicial activism. The nature of these tribunals, like General Court Martial and others, are that sometimes they can be highly manipulated. And they are characterized with abuses also. There is a lot of emotion, there is a lot of heat of passion. I think there is a case in this country of people who were tried and sentenced to death in 3 hours by a field court martial. And so those are not processes that you can live without checks, the necessary checks and balances. But I've also had the benefit to read the views of people like General Tinyefuza. And General Tinyefuza was very, very active in the formation of the UPDF Act. And he says, we took a lot of time while forming views, forming this UPDF Act. And that it was our intention that whatever is not achieved, that we took a time to ensure that there is harmonization between the military law and the civil law. Mm-hmm. And so for him, as far as he's concerned, actually, even a death sentence by a court martial cannot be effected without the intervention of the Supreme Court. So it is his view that actually there can be appeals from the General Court Martial to the Supreme Court. That as it may. Now we have an issue of lawyers, including Martha Karua, going to the General Court Martial. Right now, our position, and speaking as part of the lawyers of Dr. SJ, our position is that we do not recognize the General Court Martial in as far as Dr. SJ's case is concerned. The UPDF Act and the General Court Martial is established as a disciplinary mechanism to deal with excesses and offenses within the military officers. When you read the wording of the UPDF Act, it is very clear it is intended to deal with indiscipline and excesses within the military. So, for Dr. SJ and other civilians who are not part of the military, who retired, they said, okay, we might have cases of people, wananchi, who also carry arms and actually start killing. Let's create offenses within the penal code that relate to use and bad use of firearms and killing. And those offenses are there. They are prescribed for. So we do not intend to subject ourselves before the court martial beyond telling it that it has no jurisdiction. Our position right now, we are asking the court martial to make rulings on two issues. One, that it does not have jurisdiction to hear a case against Dr. SJ, who is not a serving military officer, and two, that Dr. SJ should be transferred to a civilian court if the regime, if the state has any offenses against him. And that is when perhaps we should be able to see now Martha Karua and everyone else substantively submitted before court. But even if Martha Karua is given a license tomorrow, and Dr. SJ returns to court in January or January 5th, even when she has a license, we do not intend to proceed with the case beyond going there to challenge its jurisdiction. And so we hope that if we can challenge this process successfully, Dr. SJ will be the last person to appear before the court martial, will be the last civilian Ugandan to appear before the court martial in that nature. And when we, and that is why Dr. Besigye is also saying, don't even apply for bail. I do not need bail from the General Court Martial. I can stay in Ruzura. The court martial should know that it has no jurisdiction over me. If the state thinks that I have any offenses, let them take me to the High Court and try me there. And that is that is the position. But it speaks to the meddling of the politics in our judicial system. Right now, it's not Dr. Besigye and Rutale who are on trial. It is our entire judicial system that is on trial. You can see how the application of Martha Karua has put the Judicial Service Commission, headed by Justice Muriagonja, on spotlight. She is already a practicing advocate. She is here in Uganda in her capacity as being appointed as an advocate of Dr. Besigye. The Judicial Service Commission simply needs to confirm with the Kenyan Judicial Service Commission and authorize her, give her a temporary. She's not asking to stay in Uganda, it's just a temporary practicing certificate. And that is what they are doing. So you can see that at the end of the day, this process is also going to shine a torch on the workings and the performance of the Ugandan Judicial Service Commission. And we hope that at the end of the day, it will reap fruits. It will reap good fruits in the performance of the Judicial Service Commission, because now Martha Karua has applied again through the Uganda Law Society. She has got the backing of the Uganda Law Society, because the Uganda Law Society is the guarantor of legal practice in Uganda. Now the Uganda Law Society said, okay, bring us our application. Our president of the Uganda Law Society is the member of the Judicial Service Commission. He is telling Ugandans that actually Judicial Service Commission never even sat to listen to the Martha Karua application.
Law Council.
Yes.
Law Council, yes.
The Law Council. Yes, the Law Council never sat to listen to the Martha Karua application. He should have been invited to be there and also to give his views. They never invited him. Now he is going there with this application to defend it. And then we want to see how low does the Law Council want to sink in this matter.
On behalf of the regime.
Interesting, very interesting submission. We come back to you, Dr. Matembe. I know in the interest of time, you have other engagements. Before you actually leave us, what could be your final thoughts or contributions to this conversation that we're having?
But for me, my final thoughts is that surely Ugandans need to wake up. Because for sure, I'm glad he has explained that thing. When I was talking about Besigye's case, I wanted also to talk about lack of jurisdiction of this military court over Besigye. I mean, just, you called it impunity. You know, where you get a head of state who orders and commands things which are illegal. In fact, you people keep saying, people abuse us, even this Kamia. When she was still sane, before she was grabbed, because they take them when they feel poor and hungry, they grab them and give them the positions of power. She used to very much accuse me before she went into the government that we gave President Museveni too much power in the constitution. And I used to tell people that when we were in that constitution, making that constitution, one of the things that occupied our mind was to decentralize powers. Because we found that during Obote's government, even he was the one to appoint chiefs, you know, the chiefs, sub-county chiefs and so on. Sub-county chiefs, and we said, no, this is too much centralization of power. We must decentralize power. But as we were discussing, we said, you know, that time when we were making the constitution, Uganda was like revival. Do you know the revival? That almost everybody was saved, and we were saying, let us do the right thing. I'm telling you, let us do the right thing. And therefore, we were saying, look, when you elect a president, everybody looks at the president for any performance. Even when have you heard people praising ministers when the ministries do well?
No.
They thank the president, they thank the government and the president. So we're saying when things go right, the president is the one who is known to have made them right. When they go wrong, he is the one who is to blame. So we said, therefore, in appointing people whom he must work with, let us give him the authority to participate in the appointing of the people that will form his government, so that when he is working, he will know, yes, they were the right people. Instead of putting him there and then deny him the power and authority to participate in appointing people who work with him. And that's why, because by that time, we were looking at the parliament as our voice. We knew that the members of parliament were the voices of Ugandans. And therefore, that's what we said. The president, when you look in that constitution, appointing whether it is judges, whether it is ministers, whether it is these head of institutions in this country, the president has no power or right to appoint an individual and finish. That's why we said that when he appoints anybody, they must be subjected to parliament. Parliament which was ours now. That when we give him the opportunity to appoint the people, propose the people whom he would like to work with, because he's the one to be blamed or what, or thanked,
Praised,
or praised. So, but whenever he proposes the names, let them go to parliament. And parliament has powers to reject these names. And once it rejects, the president had no right to force the parliament. I mean, we were thinking that we are planning for the nation which will be having leaders who have sense in their heads, who would be leaders, who would have integrity, who would be driven by service. We didn't know that down the road, the parliament would just be a servant of the president. Because they have a right to say, no, we don't want this kind of a person. When we were there, when we were members of parliament, Museveni never ruled on us until when the 7th parliament, when he bought people to change the constitution, and then we managed to go through until we never went through again. That was the end of us. Until that time when he captured parliament, we were deciding on our own. But the moment he captured parliament and turned it into his, that's why he's seen to be having absolute power. But I tell people, he is abusing power. He is abusing the law. He is abusing power. He's not working within the law of this land. And it is so painful. It is so painful. And therefore, for me, you are asking me what is the last thing. Unless Ugandans wake up, to really say, no, we cannot be ruled by this one man when we have laws to rule this nation, when we spend our money on electing these members of parliament, judiciary, all our taxes, they tax us so much to pay service, to pay, salaries, allowances to all these people who are in leadership, but then they are doing nothing there. So they would rather not be there, and we know we have one dictator, so they go home, they are not paid for what they are paid, or they must stand up and occupy their positions. As for the East African region, I would like to call upon the presidents of this region. Surely, they cannot bow to one man, because they meet with him. I mean, if it needs disassociating with Uganda, let them at least say that. But they cannot be the old man with the heart, ruling all the people and the young leaders in the region. No, let them get up and wake up and reject and say, look, we must build, either East African, we build it, or we have failed. Let them be honest and speak the truth. Otherwise, the citizens of this region are suffering. for lack of standing up for what is right, for what is just, for lack of good leadership for the African people. Enough is enough. And therefore, me, I call upon you, the citizens themselves, to stop fearing, after all, to get justice and get right their sacrifices.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honorable. Joseph or Robert?
I think I'll take you guys back very briefly on the question of Pan-Africanism in context, because I think it helps on this. But before I do that, a disclaimer is that I'll just make a very quick correction on what Dr. Matembe said, although she's not here, but it's not a big argument. It's just a clarification for historical purposes. I happen to have been lucky that I was actually around. And one of my uncles was a parish chief, and also equivalent of LC1, who also was a permanent LC1. And I also happen to have known sub-county Gombele chiefs, who are many and family friends, one of whom I nearly got married into the family had I not gone to exile. The local chiefs were not appointed by the president. In fact, the very powerful county chiefs like Ufono Pondo's dad were not appointed by the president. These guys were appointed by local governments. In fact, one of the reasons why Bidande Sali became the Minister for Local Government under Museveni was because the Minister for Local Government was the most powerful, influential minister outside central government, because they managed local governments centrally. And so local governments managed local education services, health services, and everything else. But anyway, chiefs were not appointed from that perspective. Number two, if you actually list, and maybe a conversation, Dr. Jambo, that you may need to review as an academic, what then were the powers of the president at the time versus the powers of the president today. If you see the kind of appointments Mr. Museveni makes, up to including military commanders, and my good friend Felix Kulaji just mentioned the other day, some of the promotions that have been made, the president used not to make those appointments, certainly not what a government, of course, it was a military government. All those appointments, including the Army Chief of Staff, Army Chief of Staff, were appointed by the Army Council appointed by the Army Council, interviewed and everything else, and all the recommendations sent to the president. So actually, Mr. Museveni has a huge amount of powers. Not to bash these commissioners. In fact, these guys tend to be very defensive, explaining themselves. I also have somebody else, Judith, and you'll see why I'm rushing with it. There is another person who's a CM member, and that's a good friend of mine, Romeshan, I must say. Romeshan actually argued severally that they were giving Mr. Museveni these powers because sort of they trusted him. And once upon a time, one of them even said that actually they're giving Mr. Museveni these powers in order to bribe him, with the hope that once the constitution is done, Mr. Museveni will be persuaded to serve a term and go. So point is, these guys did not see that this guy, whom we had seen from outside, was this terrible guy who was actually prepared to push the country so far and to really run down the country himself up to his grave, which is an extremely sad thing. But I thought I would say that, and also leave that as a subject for conversation, including, if you can imagine today, heads of bodies, heads of parastatals, heads of organizations, I think even RDCs, deputy RDCs and people like that. I think only district commissioners then were appointed by the president, but the rest were not. But look, Pan-Africanism within this context is under siege. The concept and the definition of Pan-Africanism is beyond basically this one Africa thing. The regional foundations really was very much about African identity and personality of African peoples. And so therefore, it is a concept that should ideally drive us further and beyond the continent. And so therefore, the African personality from Jamaica, Grenada, Guyana, up to and including our powerful Haiti. Number one. Number two, the ideology then was very much about our identity and welfare and interests. The Pan-Africanist agenda saw the idea of creating this one African globalness, but one in which there's a possibility of other Africans from outside the mainland and motherland to return. And finally, at the core was anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism, and if you like, to undo what slavery and colonialism did. The biggest interesting element to this is that today, the number one Nyampala, as Dr. Boto would call him,
the number one agent of imperialism on the continent has been Mr. Museveni. So this Pan-Africanist song of Mr. Museveni is completely always contradictory to the values of the Pan-Africanist agenda. Maybe that's one of the reasons why, as a continent, we're in dilemma. A Pan-Africanist should not invade another. Museveni invaded Rwanda. A Pan-Africanist should not invade another. Museveni invaded Burundi. A Pan-Africanist should not invade the other. Museveni invaded Congo. A Pan-Africanist should not invade the other. Museveni invaded South Sudan. A Pan-Africanist technically should not invade. They invaded Somalia. All those countries were invaded on instructions not of African Union, but to serve an interest of global anti-colonial forces. Why am I saying that to conclude this quickly? No, at the moment the challenge facing the continent is one of leadership driven by values and ideology and clarity on the objective of the formation of the African Union, Organization of African Unity, and really the identity of the African personnel today. But if we come back home to Uganda of Mr. Museveni, who wants to be the founder, president of East Africa, and his son, Ruto, these guys are not ideologically driven when it comes to these things at all. These guys are driven by selfish interests. And so therefore, these dreams that Dr. Jambos teach at universities, and some of the elements of what our lawyer friends will pick up from Arusha in Dar es Salaam, in Tanzania, is so far away from the reality of our political leaders that we have today. So to me, it's actually very worrying. Very quickly, it is shocking that Mr. Museveni can seek to justify the court-martial in a manner in which he does. One, it's completely a clear contradiction. The conversation we discussed here will not repeat. That quite clearly is not the right place for Besigye. And two, the fact that Besigye should really have been tried if there's an offense committed in Kenya by a Kenyan jurisdiction. And three, if there was an issue with Besigye, he should have been extradited here formally and legally. And if that happened, that Besigye is tried in a civilian court in Uganda. But for Mr. Museveni to belittle the average Ugandan, particularly in this case, thinking that Ugandans don't understand, and so to justify it using Karamoja. Mr. Museveni, in his letter of the other day, justifies the court-martial because it has worked to pacify. No! What nonsense! You know, the idea that you use soldiers to deal with a state of insurgents does not mean that you make them super. But in any case, we know this is a military regime anyway of Mr. Museveni. But number two, to say just quite insulting that the 900 young Karamojong people who are petty offenders or whatever offenders fit the case are in prison. We are containing them thanks to a court-martial. Does it require a court-martial to get to get people who committed an offense and then go ahead and try them and hold them? But particularly of insult is the idea that these Karamojong are being housed and fed. You know, we are feeding them because they would go naked. You know, we are feeding them because they would go hungry. But you know what? I gave you my wife, but my wife failed to feed you. My wife failed to house you as minister for Karamoja. What nonsense is this? Do you know what? The people who should be going to those jails are not those Karamojong. For me, as a social scientist, and by the way, as a scholar, as far as the social issues are concerned, by the way, globally, it's recognized, and one lawyer here would say, in most cases, one of the biggest causes of crime, particularly amongst young people, is unemployment. And in many cases, actually, among many of these petty thefts, is economic disparities. And in many cases, if you go into the streets of Karamoja and you look at some of the cultural challenges, they're primarily failure of institutions, failures of systems, and failures of the state. So it's actually an indictment on Mr. Museveni and his system. And finally, do you know why? Why his wife went there and failed, but instead, I don't know what they came back home with. I hope it is not gold. And while I know that a number of people, including a former British minister, lost a relative, I was still an active political leader of UPC abroad. I know a British citizen, died. They had a crash in Karamoja that several years ago before Mr. Museveni's wife went down there. And part of these things are gold deals, meaning sucking from these Karamoja people. Do you know what? Right now, one of the biggest challenges is the fact that Mr. Museveni's own cabinet has got 22, certainly 21 ministers of his who are actually criminally responsible for the mess in Karamoja, because they know they're basically thieves in Mr. Museveni's cabinet, including his speaker mentioned, including his chief whip mentioned, including his finance minister mentioned, over thieving in Karamoja, and they sit in his cabinet. No, those are the people who should be going to those jails, not these young people.
Wow. Robert?
Yeah, you know, the biggest problem that has been in this country for a very long time, beginning in the early 80s, is people underestimating Yoweri Museveni. In most cases, we underestimate this man and we misunderstand him. You heard when Honorable Matembe was saying how they expected him to be a nice person, to understand them. I didn't have time to interject because you cannot interject, Honorable Matembe. That would be absurd. But this man was the midwife of the Constitution. What the commissioners were doing for information, commissioners were 10, then the CAs were in big number. These commissioners almost were coached what to do. There is no way, if commissioners were very sanctic and they understood what they were doing, would give a lot of power to the president like they did in the Constitution. And as I've told you earlier, I have said that he has used it as a tool to promote his personal rule and dictatorship in Uganda. Because if you appoint a person, especially in Africa here, a person appoints you in our tradition, there is a way you have to give back through respect. Now, if you want to leave eating after they have appointed you, it creates a very big problem. I'm very sure even these judges, these justices and other people, when they listen to us talking, they turn in their beds, uncomfortable. But what can they do? Because if you are suffering and the man picks you, he gives you an office, therefore you have to really do things the way he's doing. If you don't, you are either going to jail or you are going to suffer there humiliated, and a human being does not want to be humiliated naturally. So whatever you are seeing happening with us is a very planned thing. Me, I've looked through these processes from CA to date. You just see a planned thing, something which was planned.
Design, yeah.
For example, the president is an ardent, he hates bail. And his argument has been that bail allows criminals to be set free. He tried the courts and the judge told him that, the chief judge told him that I am not the one who created bail. My work is to give it. So long as it is in the law, I will give it. So what do? You empower another, because Yoweri Museveni is a military officer. Military officers don't normally have one plan. They normally have an attack plan and a retreat plan. So this man looks at the judicial system, sometimes cannot fulfill what he wants. For example, the judicial system cannot try somebody because you want him to be tried. So you go to the court martial. Court martials are places which is a continuation of the army ranks. So it is a place of order. They give you an order, you go and fulfill it. In the courts, you don't give somebody order that go and judge this case like this. They judge cases according to the evidence that is adduced. So I really think that we are going to have a very big fight here on the issue of the general court martial. The president has hinted that he is going to organize a referendum. I don't know when that will be, and that referendum, we don't know whether it will not be rigged or something. So we are waiting for that referendum. But on these matters that we're now discussing, the general court martial, sometimes I look at those leaders of the general court martial, and you have been seeing the leaders of the general court martial, starting from General Tumwine, then to the one who left before this one. How come, if the president is a lover of law, if the president loves so much rule of law, not rule by law that I normally tell him that he uses, the president uses rule by law, how come he does not appoint people with legal background into this court? There are so many soldiers who are at the rank of colonel and above who are legal experts. They have studied law up to master's degree, and others have even been advocates of the High Court. Why doesn't he appoint those ones? Instead, he appoints military officers. If you check the CV of the current chairman of the court martial, the last time he had this normal education was senior 4. Then he went into those military trainings, master in strategic this, master in strategic that one, in the military. There is nothing law about him there. So how do you expect, and I sympathize with my counsel there, you can imagine yourself pleading with a person legally to understand you from a legal perspective, when for him, he is looking at things from a military perspective. You have heard how that man,
military and command,
the advocate, was almost ruling that this should not be allowed. He was saying nobody should talk about the case at the General Court Martial. He was almost ruling, only that the other one, being his officer, he said, no, we are not going there, and these people struggling, that we cannot discuss that matter. He thinks that when they go there, they should respect them. They shouldn't speak. For them, these people, the lawyers, when the senior counsel stands up, the other counsels immediately have to sit down. For them, they don't know who is a senior counsel, who is what. They don't care about it. I sympathize with the Kizza Besigye, because Kizza Besigye normally wants to fight for the country, and yet he is fighting in a country where things are funny. So I really sympathize with him. The aim is good, but I see him really suffering in that court martial. They may give Martha Karua a license finally when they find a problem, but that is if Museveni does not aim. If the Museveni I know may reject that thing to the end. The only way out, which I think that my colleagues should also explore, is it, and you know that judgment of the Supreme Court is somehow preemptive, because it was preempting what I was thinking about. Because the next thing would have been to go to the courts of jurisdiction and say, is it okay for us to continue being in that court when we have already raised these issues? The Court of Appeal has ruled 3 years ago. Is it okay? So that maybe there would be an interpretation which would set Besigye free. The way I see right now, I don't know how they are going. Museveni will just maybe think and say, okay, that is punishment enough, now you go home. And therefore they will rule on your side. But as we end, I think this one affects all of us, and it affects everybody. We don't need to be yellow or red or blue or whatever. I think a bad thing is a bad thing. For me, I've always told people that sleeping in a garage does not make somebody become a car. And therefore, me, I cannot go to that court martial. And if I'm taken there, I'll remain silent.
Thank you, Doctor. Let me hear from you, Honorable Moses Counsel. In regard to the Supreme Court ruling, of course, when I read through again, this was in response to an appeal by a serving UPDF soldier. So I don't know if such a ruling would then apply to a case of, for instance, Dr. Kizza Besigye or a civilian. And also, when you read again, still on this ruling, there's just one paragraph that says, that basically throws the responsibility back to the legislature. I could just read it for the benefit of all of you. It says, indeed, one may impute that had the legislature intended that the civil courts should have jurisdiction over military court-martial courts, it would have purposefully provided for the jurisdiction by law. So my interpretation is that the responsibility therefore then shifts back to the Legislative House to come up with legislation or an act of parliament or something to that effect. I don't know if
Yes. Yeah. First of all, thank you for that first question. This recent ruling has confused the Ugandans, especially in the face of the Besigye trial. But like you rightly said, this was an appeal by a serving UPDF soldier who had appeared before the court martial. And the ruling is basically saying soldiers who have been tried in the court martial cannot appeal in civilian courts because the act does not provide for appeal in the civilian courts. So this doesn't affect Besigye at all. Besigye is not a soldier and he's not being tried there as a soldier. Even when they are referring to him, they are not referring to him in the capacity of a soldier. They That's only what saying Besigye he had the gun, so he deserves to be tried in the military courts. So the Besigye is facing charges of being in possession of firearms and the related offences that were committed in Kenya and I forgot
other
what
countries.
places.
Yes.
Yes. So the ruling does not affect his case because he's appearing there as a civilian. The only issue that they have with him is that he had firearms.
Allegedly.
So allegedly, and we are saying that yes, now that you know that he's a civilian, he shouldn't be here. He should instead be in the civilian courts. Now, this ruling, like we had earlier said, although it doesn't affect Besigye, but there is a way it boosts the morale of the court martial, which is already riding on impunity, to continue to do, to do funny things.
Yeah.
Because even soldiers, you can imagine, like the case I told you, I've forgotten the parties. These young people were tried like from 9 in the morning, and by midday, the matter was resolved and they were killed. They were executed.
Was that here?
Yes.
Yes, in
In
Uganda.
Uganda.
In
I think
Uganda.
it was
And the NRA.
yes, the
Yes,
court
man.
martial sat in northern Uganda,
Northern
if I'm
Uganda.
not mistaken. Yes, they were executed in 3 hours. You ask yourself, really, were the guarantors, the ends of justice, were they met in that process? Were did they have a fair hearing in that process? Did they have access to even a lawyer of their choice to defend themselves? Does the UPDF trials say that someone doesn't have a right to
Defend himself.
to defend himself? Can't he have legal representation? I know that there are also lawyers within the UPDF. Were those young people accorded that kind of fair hearing? But also, don't we stand a very huge risk as a country that we have got a tribunal that is exercising quasi-judicial powers, but is not subordinate and cannot be supervised by courts of judicature? Don't we run a very, very high risk? If tomorrow you have a one Biamjisha and he is the CDF, isn't that institution prone to abuse like we have already seen, like what is happening? So it's a very, very terrible ruling. Like I said, it lacks judicial activism. You can see, shameless as he may be, even the head of state has said, no. There is a problem there. Courts can actually interrogate the decisions of the court martial. The Supreme Court can actually receive an appeal. Bad decisions within the joint court martial can be appealed within the civilian courts, because he also sees that it defeats common sense. So we need to, and like you had hinted, we need to reflect on the draft of this law, to look at the UPDF Act, when I was reading it, I could see that there is something that was not foreseen. They considered, the legislators did not foresee that we would have, for example, this scenario where the court martial can be abused, can be twisted, can be used as a stick by the powers that be. The legislators did not imagine that. They imagined that there would be sanity, and that the enforcers, they even explain, the EPDF explains who can go in the court martial, how is he appointed, which rank he must be, major and what have you. So you can see that they looked at they considered that things would be fine. They did not imagine that there would be a regime that would try to use the court martial to fight politics. They thought the court martial is an institution to deal with the discipline of the military, which has proved not to be the case. So it means that we've got to go back on the drawing board. These events might require amendments within the law. And I think both sides now are interested in amendments. Yeah, I can see that the military, the thinking of the military, and in this case the commander-in-chief, may be interested in actually having civilians in military courts. My colleagues earlier talked about the issue of Karamojong young people who have been tried in the court martial. Friends, I think it's a very, very painful thing. You already talked about the issue of disparities in terms of incomes. You talked about the factor of unemployment and how it leads young people into criminality. But when we go back to the thinking of an ordinary Karamojong, does he even believe that possession of a gun is a crime?
No.
Does he even believe, do they believe consciously that even going to me getting my fellow young people to Ochieno's corral, going to Ochieno's corral to get his cows is actually criminal?
No.
There is a gap in there. The law is not being sensitive to the way we are applying the law, using the court martial. We are not being sensitive to the cultures, to the values of these people. We have got a law against causing grievous bodily harm. If Ochieno boxes me and I lose my tooth and I bleed, he can actually be charged for causing grievous bodily harm. Now, look at female genital mutilation in Sebei. You have got these old women who are cutting those young girls. They are actually causing grievous harm on bodies of these young people. But would you quickly bring them to court to charge them with causing bodily grievous harm in the sense, in the spirit of the law as it was enacted? No, because there is another issue in Sebei.
You need a cultural shift.
Yes.
That's a whole...
On the basis of the spirit in which you judge the Ochieno boxing.
Exactly. There is a cultural issue that you've got to deal with. So there is a cultural issue with these young, with Karamojongs, with these 900 young people in Karamoja. Do they really appreciate, like we do, the spirit of the law? That being in possession of guns, while do you know actually that not all those guns, yes, potentially they could go to cause harm in other communities, but some of those young people are simply carrying those guns defense as they take care of their animals. And
just like, if you don't mind, we know of Bahima men carrying guns all the way, some of them from Tanzania via Western Uganda, the corridor and Katu corridor. And now they found themselves in Ankole, I mean, in Choliland.
Look at our culture with sticks. How we like carrying.
Precisely.
How we carry sticks.
For herding cattle.
For herding cattle.
And sometimes
but by the way, you will even meet them here in Uchumi carrying those sticks.
Yes.
Yes, they will carry them everywhere, and for them it is okay. When you meet them here in Kampala and in these supermarkets and on Kampala Road carrying those sticks, for you you'll be scared because you are outside. But to them it's part of them to go with those sticks. It has a cultural connotation. So in the way we are applying the law and regarding these young people in Karamoja, are we being mindful to this? If you go and cordon and search this home and you find a firearm and you round up those 5 boys and you take them and you try them according to military law, are you really not being insensitive to their cultural values? So I think there is a lot of abuse and impunity in the way we are dealing with this.
And Honorable, I'm also going to ask you to give me your concluding remarks as we move this side and close the conversation.
So, in my concluding remarks on this whole issue, it is, we see practices, judicial decisions, judicial maneuvers that are decorated with political impunity. We see politics everywhere trying to twist institutions of government to serve the ends not of justice but the ends of politics, which is very, very unfortunate. So we should speak out against it, we should stand up against it, and we should rise against it and say, no, we can't continue like that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Moses Biamugisha. Joseph, your concluding remarks, and then I hear from Dr. Jambo.
It's going to be almost something that I wanted to make an interjection. But amazingly, of the 3 soldiers killed in northern Uganda, in Enere by Enere. And before I say that, interestingly, when Kamunyu, is it Kamunyu?
Kanyamunyu.
That guy who killed Akena, you know? Was it tried in the court martial?
No.
We went to the High Court.
Fellow citizens, have you heard that? So, what selected justice is here? No, this is a repressive military regime that is pushing a very specific agenda, and the system that is actually seeking to break our country rather than to bring it together. And I think, like Dr. Matembe said, Ugandans need to wake up. Judith, amazing concluding remark that came to me as my young friend was talking is this business of those soldiers who were executed within the 3 hours, or certainly on the same day. With my understanding and appreciation of the law, and with my desired goal to have been part of this trade, thankfully I've studied the law as part of many other things. Do you know what? The threshold for matters like that, goes up beyond balance of probability to beyond reasonable doubt. And when it hits that, and here is a matter that you know that the remedy is nothing else but death, it is saying that no, you must, like Nyerere said, and their old friend, old military, but they were saying that, in the law, that you rather let 10 criminals off than to, or perhaps 100 kill one innocent one. The requirement would be otherwise then, that not only that should these people not be executed within the short period of time, that actually all the key background checks, including all the sufficient provisions given for them, before you actually make that critical decision, particularly because you're going to kill them. If it's some little boy that you're going to be, okay, you go 30 seconds, whatever, this is not you worry. But that should be, but that tells you the level of lawlessness we have in this country under this regime. And it's something that I think must stop. Ugandans ought to wake up. And you know what? It's best day today, tomorrow it could be anybody else. This is an indictment on a regime that after 40 years must really, 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 really retire.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joseph Ocheno. Let me hear from you lastly now, Dr. Jambo.
I think with these things happening, we are moving from a situation of bad to worse. And if we don't apply a brake very quickly, we shall have disaster in our country. because if you look at the population is marred by a lot of apathy to an extent that people now have given up. And that's why you see churches are mushrooming everywhere. People have given up and gone to God because they think that they are not in control of what they are doing. So we need a quick, as you suggested, we need a quick look at the law. Because you see that in every act that we have in our frame of laws, there is something that is against the people of Uganda. Like, for example, that 2005 Act, UPDF Act, would have been a good thing. But you see, in it, they hide some small section. One section, I think section 4C, which talks about people can be tried so long as they are found with the military-related thing. So such a thing need to be removed from there. Because dictators normally don't even use the whole law. They look for a very small thing in the law, and they use it to perpetuate their dictatorship. For example, we need to reduce the powers of a president so that the president does not become a very hot thing. I tell you, with this constitution that we have here, even if today Museveni left and we got another president, maybe if we get a reverend, but we have seen terrible reverends, we are going to have the same cry, because you cannot talk about over 40 sections of the constitution empowering only one person, the president. Then finally, I don't think that these things are going to come to us on a silver platter, that somebody is going to sit there and sympathize with us. For example, what has happened to our country now? There is no demonstration. I heard the other day the opposition leaders were signing something that they are going to show. I have not seen them anywhere since that day. They have gone back to sleep.
Can I just say that, if you don't mind? I know it's a conclusion, and that signing thing, I want to tell the leaders of opposition, led by Senyoni, that I wasn't informed. I'm really the official elected leader of the Uganda People's Congress, and these guys need to know that, number one. But number two, they need to explain why UPC was not fully represented there. Because in any case, there are people who are parading as UPC, but we need to know whether or not they got concerned. Because it's extremely important that political parties come together, and regardless of our opinions and our shares of opinion, the matter at stage, at center is Kizza Besigye. That should be helping us as a rallying ground, as a political opposition, democratic opposition, including, if I may say so, if there are some sensible people in NRA, and I know fantastic friends in NRA, I would actually even have expected one or two legislators from NRA to come and stand with these leaders in solidarity.
Okay. So finally, for me, if you asked me, with all the justifications given by everybody, including the president, even if God came and gave justifications today, I still feel that trying civilians in a military court is absurd.
Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Council Honorable Moses Byemogisha, Mr. Joseph Ocheno, and Dr. Robert Ojambo, for joining me on this discussion today here on Citizens Chat Show. Of course, we've been talking about a number of issues, but in particular, we have been focusing on the future of the East African community, given the turbulence regarding the free movement of goods and services in the region. Case in point has been that of Martha Karua's temporary practicing license to join Dr. Kizza Besigye and Haj Obeid Lutale's legal team as the lead counsel. Thank you very much for being a part of the conversation, and to you watching us, thank you very much for staying with us this far. The Chat Show returns next week, same time, different conversation, but see you then. My name is Judith Atim. Bye for now.